Forecasters looking ahead to the first days of August have flagged something that sounds almost too strange to be a serious meteorological finding. Cities, including Naples, Barcelona, Rome, Valencia, Nice, Thessaloniki, Split, and Athens, are all forecast to hold above 20 degrees Celsius every single night, not during the day, at night, when temperatures are supposed to be giving people a break. Meteorologists have a specific term for that threshold, a tropical night, and this year it is becoming the real story of Europe's heat, not the dramatic daytime highs that usually make the headlines. According to Greek meteorologist Giannis Virginie, an exceptionally warm Mediterranean Sea is leaving its fingerprint on land in an unusual place, showing up in the nights rather than the afternoons. That is the weird twist behind this new heat pattern, and it is worth understanding exactly why, because it changes what actually makes this kind of heat dangerous, and it means the number most people are watching. The afternoon high may not even be the number that matters most this particular summer. This is the story of why Europe's nights have become the real signal to watch this summer, what an abnormally warm sea has to do with it, and why scientists say this pattern matters more for your health than the big, attention-grabbing daytime number ever did. No exaggeration, just what Copernicus, National Meteorological Services across Europe, and the researchers tracking this exact pattern are reporting. Drop a comment and tell me if the nights where you live have stopped cooling down the way they used to, whether you are anywhere near the Mediterranean or somewhere else entirely. Because that detail is exactly the pattern this video is about to explain. I read every one of these. If you want grounded weather coverage instead of recycled panic, subscribe. It is free and a like helps this reach people before this pattern reaches them. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Now let us get into it. To understand why this pattern qualifies as genuinely weird rather than simply another hot summer, you first need to understand how coastal heat is normally supposed to behave. During a typical summer day, the sea absorbs heat slowly throughout the daylight hours, then releases that heat back into the air gradually overnight, which is precisely why coastal cities usually cool down more reliably after dark than cities further inland do. That nightly release is also supposed to come with a second layer of relief, the afternoon sea breeze, cooler air pulled in off the water that helps take the edge off the day's peak heat along the coastline specifically. This year, of those normally reliable cooling mechanisms have effectively flipped into their opposite. Because the Mediterranean itself is running abnormally warm, the sea releases far more back into the coastal air overnight than usual, keeping nighttime lows elevated instead of letting them drop. And because the sea surface is so warm to begin with, that same afternoon breeze that used to bring relief now delivers mild, humid air instead, adding to heat, stress, rather than easing it. Think of it as the sea's usual role reversing entirely. The same body of water that has cooled Mediterranean summers for as long as anyone can remember is now actively working against that cooling process instead, at exactly the two moments in the daily cycle, afternoon and overnight, when people most depend on it for relief, leaving essentially no part of the day where the coast's usual natural air conditioning is actually doing its job. The scale of what that warm sea is actually doing is significant enough that European climate monitors have been tracking it closely. The Copernicus Marine Service has recorded sea surface temperature anomalies across the Mediterranean running meaningfully above the seasonal average this year. Warm enough that meteorologists studying the pattern describe it as the atmosphere's great reservoir of energy and moisture directly reshaping the storms, nights, and heat waves the region experience. As on land, tropical nights when overnight lows stay above 20 degrees Celsius, and the more oppressive category researchers call sweltering nights when lows never drop below 25, have both become measurably more common across the continent in recent years. In 2024, Europe recorded its second highest tropical night count since Copernicus began keeping detailed records, behind only 2010, with 37% of the continent experiencing more tropical nights than its own historical average that year alone, a pattern that hit southeastern Europe hardest of all. Europe as a whole has also been warming at roughly twice the global average rate over the past 3 decades, according to that same monitoring data, a distinction that helps explain why a shift this specific and this measurable has emerged clearly enough for meteorologists to flag it as a defining feature of this particular summer, rather than simply background noise within normal year-to-year variation. Here's why the shift toward nighttime heat deserves more attention than it typically gets, because it is not simply a curiosity for meteorologists to track. And it is not the way most people are used to thinking about heat at risk at all. Public health researchers have identified poor nighttime cooling as one of the specific factors that most worsens the overall health impact of a heat wave, since the human body relies on that overnight temperature drop to recover from a day of heat stress. When nights fail to cool down, the recovery window disappears entirely, regardless of how the following day's high temperature compares to previous records. That distinction matters enormously for how dangerous a given heat wave actually turns out to be, since 2 summers with an identical daytime high can carry meaningfully different health risks, depending entirely on whether the nights in between actually. It is worth being precise about what this pattern does and does not guarantee, because a forecast built around specific overnight thresholds for a handful of named cities still carries the same medium-range uncertainty as any other weather outlook. There's also a broader atmospheric driver, layered on top of the Mediterranean's own local warmth, and it is worth understanding how the two connect. A strengthening El Niño event has been building through the tropical Pacific this year, with NOAA estimating a 97% probability that the event continues into early next spring, and roughly an 80% probability that it reaches very strong intensity later this year, a designation reserved for only the most powerful El Niño events on record. European weather is not directly controlled by El Niño the way weather across the Pacific and the Americas often is, since several intermediate links, including the North Atlantic Oscillation and the position of the jet stream, sit between the tropical Pacific Sea and the European continent. Even so, the strongest signal shared across forecasting systems, including the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts, Copernicus, and the World Meteorological Organization for the months ahead, is a consistent lean toward above-average temperatures across Europe, reinforcing the same warm sea surface conditions already driving this year's unusual run of tropical nights across so many of the continent's most populous coastal cities. The specific list of cities expected to hold above 20 degrees every night in early August reflects current forecast guidance rather than a locked certainty. And any individual night could still come in slightly cooler than projected, depending on local conditions, cloud cover, or short-term shifts in wind direction along the coast. What is not uncertain is the broader trend the Copernicus data actually documents. Tropical nights becoming measurably more frequent across Europe over recent years, tied directly to a Mediterranean Sea that is running warmer than it used to, consistent enough that researchers describe it as one of the clearest signals of the region's broader warming pattern rather than a single, unusual season, distinct from any specific city's exact forecast for any specific night. So what does all of this actually mean if you live anywhere along the Mediterranean coast, or anywhere else that has noticed its own nights failing to cool down the way they used to? The practical lesson is to stop judging how dangerous a heat wave is purely by its daytime high, and start paying closer attention to your own home's overnight temperature specifically, since that number is what actually determines how much genuine recovery time your body gets before the next hot day begins. Keep at least one room cool enough to sleep in, even if that means a fan overnight rather than only during the day. Avoid extra layers of heat exposure, like using an oven or leaving electronics running unnecessarily in the evening. Close shutters or blinds during the hottest part of the afternoon to keep that heat from building up indoors in the first place. Drink water steadily throughout the evening rather than only during the day, and check on elderly relatives or neighbors specifically at night, since poor sleep quality during sustained heat is a genuine, documented health risk rather than a minor inconvenience, particularly for anyone managing a heart condition or other chronic illness that heat stress can meaningfully worsen. The honest, grounded summary is this. Forecasters are projecting that several major Mediterranean cities will hold above 20 degrees Celsius every single night. Through the first days of August, a threshold meteorologists classify as a tropical night, driven by an exceptionally warm Mediterranean Sea that is failing to cool the coastline the way it normally would after dark. That same warm sea has also disrupted the region's usual afternoon sea breeze, turning what used to be a source of relief into a source of added humidity and heat stress instead. Europe recorded its second highest tropical night count on record in 2024, with more than a third of the continent seeing more of these overnight heat events than its own historical average. And researchers say this shift toward nighttime heat, rather than daytime highs alone, is becoming one of the clearest and most dangerous signals of the region's changing climate, precisely because it strips away the recovery window the human body depends on to survive a heat wave safely, a pattern reinforced further by a strengthening El Niño event pushing the broader seasonal outlook toward above-average temperatures across the continent. We are going to keep tracking this exact pattern the way we tracked it today, straight. From Copernicus, National Meteorological Services across Europe, and the researchers studying this shift toward nighttime heat, no-T recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss it as this pattern continues through the rest of August, since forecasters are already watching whether this same warm sea signal persists into the back half of the month. And leave that comment below. Tell me if you have noticed your own nights getting harder to sleep through because of heat, because that lived experience is exactly the data point researchers are trying to explain. Because behind every one of these overnight temperature readings is a family in Naples, leaving windows open all night, hoping for even a small breeze that never quite arrives. An elderly resident in Athens, too, used to judging danger by the afternoon thermometer to notice how little relief the night is actually giving them. A parent in Barcelona checking on a sleeping child at 2 in the morning simply to make sure the room still feels safe, and a researcher in Europe's climate. Monitoring service, watching this same quiet number climb year after year, long before it ever becomes the headline the daytime heat always does. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.